Good afternoon, Eric Norton, Deputy County Executive for Finance.
Good afternoon, Roseanne Deleva, Budget Director.
I believe they're being handed out right now.
Who has the, Mr. Norton, who has the?
We have a short presentation for you today. We'll try to keep it brief so we'll have time to answer any questions that you may have and to clarify some of the responses and give you some of the more accurate answers.
Bring the mic closer to you so we can hear it.
Sure thing. Is that better?
Do the people in the back hear what's being stated up front? Because we're having a little problem here, so I'm wondering if that's the case back there. Yes, not. Okay, Mr. Norton.
Okay. I'm going to echo many of the comments made by you, Madam Presiding Officer. When you look at all the fiscal metrics of the county, most of them show that we have made significant improvements in recent years. And I just want to outline some of our accomplishments and how these accomplishments have benefited the county. Starting with, if you look at, we implemented tax surcharge reforms. Those reforms are going to yield $950 million of debt service savings over the next 20 years. We established the Disputed Assessment Fund to pay Class 4 property tax refunds. This creates a funding to eliminate borrowing for future commercial property tax refunds. We developed a process to negotiate residential small claims before the vote goes final. That process saves the county taxpayers $25 million annually. We are funding judgments and settlements from the operating budget. That has eliminated the need for borrowing. There is no borrowing for tax refunds in 2017. That is a year ahead of our financial plan. We have contained labor costs. The workforce has been reduced by over 1,700 employees since 2009. That results in an annual savings of approximately $160 million. We've improved the county's flexibility and ability to respond to crisis. As the controller stated, our GAAP fund balance is now $170.5 million. In 2012, that number was only $27 million. We have dedicated fund balance. We have a dedicated fund balance and for reserves and for other items. As the controller mentioned, we have a litigation fund, $43.6 million. Employee benefit accrued liability reserve fund, $13.1 million. A retirement contribution reserve fund, $8 million. A bonded indebtedness reserve fund of $3.6 million. That's $68.3 million outside of just our budgetary fund balance, which is $200 million. We've improved the county's cash position. That has allowed the county treasurer to reduce our annual cash flow borrowings by 37% since 2012. We've discontinued the rolling of cash flow notes, which means that we no longer have a mid-year RAND borrowing along with the end-of-year TAN borrowing, which was something that we were heavily criticized from by the rating agencies. We have eliminated that. These changes, I think, show and is measured by the rating agencies. Moody's has us as an A2, Standard & Poor's A+, and Fitch at A, all with a stable outlook. The state controller measuring fiscal stress on a scale of 100 being bad, 0 being perfect. The county was at 72.5. That number now is projected to be down to about 56. Every measure you look at, Roseanne has now turned to the growth in the budgetary fund balance. In 2009, the budgetary fund balance was $64.2 million. At the end of 2016, $200.9 million. I think it's difficult for anyone to argue that we are not on a road to recovery, and I think that we are in a very strong financial position, especially when you look at some of the other counties in New York State. How did we get there? We also, workforce management, as I stated earlier, the 2009 budget was 9,177 positions. We are currently on board 7,475 positions, 18.5% decrease. And I think most people independently looking at the county would say, despite the drop in workforce, operations have actually improved. You look at our park system, gorgeous, wonderful, roads, how we responded to emergencies like Sandy. We've done a great job, and we've been doing it with less people. Something that always comes up is sales tax. The growth right now through August is 2.6%. We conservative only budgeted 1.1%. That's going to help us yield a slight surplus this year of probably about close to $7 million. What's driving that growth is mostly due to gasoline, utilities. Gas stations, revenue's up $2.8 million for the first half of the year, a 12.7% increase. The food service and drinking places sector up $2 million, a 3.7% change. Utilities is up $1.6 million, increase of $16.1 million. Publishing industries, which is anything from Intuit software, Adobe, Microsoft software, all those things, that's up $1 million, showing a 30% change. Something that this body always looks at is police overtime. I think all the monitors have concurred that overtime is going to be down this year, that we're going to hit, probably actually be below budget. Last year we were over $70 million. This year we're projected to be probably closer to about $51 million. Dramatic improvement. Some of that's driven by the fact that we finally have started to increase the number of heads, but it's also better management of the department. They've taken initiatives to enforce the gains that they made from the labor negotiations, done things to reduce court overtime, and I think the results are very positive. And also, as everyone knows, we live in one of the safest counties in the country. Roseanne is now going to talk about the outlook for 2017.
Current outlook as of July for 2017 is a budgetary surplus of $8.5 million. That includes a use of fund balance of approximately $36 million to fund tax certiorari payments. So that's the main component of differential between us and the Controller's Office of their budgetary surplus. So I just wanted to point that out. We have areas of surplus such as public assistance, and our caseloads are down. Obviously, some of that is due to the economy, including our Medicaid payments are also down. That's approximately a $9.6 million savings. Obviously, as Eric just said, sales tax is outperforming what we had budgeted to the tune of approximately $6.8 million. We also have higher projected investment income and recoveries, approximately $6.1 million. Increased pilots and collections due to differences in the tax roll. That's also $5.7 million. Salary and fringes in terms of vacancies and lower workers' comp and health benefits, obviously, is approximately $5.3 million that the county's benefiting. Utilities, a lower usage of utilities is $3.1. And we also have lower interest expense because we're not bonding for tax certs. So I think that's relative to one of the questions that you all asked before. Our unfavorable variances, as you well know, are the inmate health care and our contractual services line. Currently, because NHCC is going to resume the responsibility to provide health services at the jail, that impacted the 2017 projected year end, as well as increased performance in red light camera program. We have to pay them additional monies because of increased performance of tickets. Also the bus route contract, which all of you were very integral in restoring. That was approximately $2.8 million increase overall. we have departmental revenues that are at risk, and obviously, we touched upon that before in the controller's presentation, the income and expense. That was offset by outperforming revenues in the clerk's office. So that variance is a $7.2 million unfavorable variance to the 2017 projected surplus. We also have public safety fee as an unfavorable variance to the projected surplus, and the extension and repayment of the NCC termination costs, and various other unfavorable variances, but all in all yielding a projected surplus of $8.5 million at the end of 17 on a budgetary basis.
That concludes our presentation, so we'll answer any questions that you may have.
Deputy Legislator Richard Nicola.
Thank you. Just want to touch on fund balance and then some other questions. In terms of a budgetary basis, you indicated that for this 2016, over $200 million.
That is correct.
And as a percentage, how does that equate? What percentage over?
Roughly about 7.5%, and as you're aware, our policy is 4 to 5%.
Does the New York State have any opinions? Does the controller, has the controller taken any actions, not necessarily against this county, but other municipalities in terms of when they have too much money in their reserve funds?
That's usually done with school districts. I'm not aware on a county level.
Okay. But the controller, I mean, I see it all the time in school districts, that they're keeping too much money in their rainy day funds and ordering them to spend some of it. When you have 7% in fund balance, and you're budgeting and taxing and raising fees or doing whatever you have to do, and the budget money is sitting out there, it's not being used to benefit the public, correct?
Correct, and I think that's one of the reasons why the county executive in February decided that we would not borrow for tax certs, but we would use the fund balance to help pay for tax cert refunds this fiscal year.
And it's a balance. Obviously, if you raid the fund balance and draw it down to 1% or less, as has happened in the past, then it becomes a concern not just for the rating agencies, but for all of us here as the governing body.
Correct.
The assistant to the controller was indicating in terms of fund balance that there's a non-spendable component of it.
She was referring to when you look at the gap fund balance, which is $170 million. There are some funds that are dedicated, for instance, our litigation fund, that's dedicated to pay just for judgments, lawsuits. There's other things such as our employee benefit liability fund that's set aside to pay for that. Right. So it's not, there's a difference between things that are just undesignated and designated.
She's referring to that. How much is in designated currently?
I don't have the number offhand on but I mean, if you look at, going back to slide 2, those items are all pretty much dedicated, and that totals, and that's $68 million of things that we have already dedicated.
Right.
And those monies they're dedicated is not necessarily a negative thing. They're
earmarked.
They're earmarked, and they prevent or they supplement the use of operating monies to pay for these various items. So, for example, litigation fund, you have a judgment, instead of taking it out and operating in a given year, you may be able to use that the reserve fund for that purpose.
That is correct.
The controller also said that he projects by the end of 2017 that there'll be less than $70 million in the fund balance. Could you just comment on that?
He's, again, in that case, he's referring to the gap fund balance. So he's assuming that we're going to use most of these dedicated funds. And for the most part, that is accurate because we will be using it. We have used most of the litigation fund to pay some settlements and agreements that we've made. We may have to tap into the employee benefit accrued liability reserve fund due to the police terminations. We did budget for the use of the retirement contribution reserve fund. But on a budgetary fund balance basis, we will definitely be above our 4 to 5% threshold.
At the end of 2017?
Yes.
Yes.
And I guess just the voluntary separation came up, and there's an indication that could, in the words of the controller, exacerbate the year-end results. What are the, and we can, we'll address this obviously later with the full
Correct.
legislature, but
I mean, to us,
What's the
we
impact?
feel that the incentive program, it's an investment. It is gonna cost us money in 2017. We will be able to use the 3.5 months of salary savings because employees must be off payroll by September 15th. We also have surpluses, as Roseanne stated, in other areas, roughly $8.5 million. So it is our belief that between the salary savings and the surplus that we already have, we should be able to cover the expected incentive plus any termination costs. If it should run higher, then obviously the fund balance is available, but we will be managing this process. Roseanne and her staff will be looking at other spending and if necessary be able to revoke spending. But the idea is that right now we have over 200 people who have applied for the incentive. That's going to provide us a savings in the out years because we'll be backfilling maybe half the positions, and the ones that will be filled will be at a much lower rate of pay. So the whole idea behind the incentive is to get long-term savings, and that is what will be accomplished.
when you say out years, you mean commencing in 2018?
Correct.
I just want to touch real quickly on the fund balance again. The terminology that was used by, I forget her name, but the controller's assistant.
Lisa Sikoris.
Okay, she used the term non-spendable, I think that's the word she used. But it's not non-spendable, it's simply dedicated to a specific purpose. So it's, I guess if you're saying, is it spendable for any purpose whatsoever, maybe she's correct, but
Correct.
in fact, it is spendable and it will be spent on various purposes.
That is correct.
And just my last question is, in terms of budgeting, if you're able to establish reserve funds and fund them thoroughly, various costs the county has, isn't that good budgeting? Aren't you able to smooth out peaks and valleys of these expenses as you go through the years? I mean,
Yes, and that's why we set those up. And I think clearly, and I can say this from our conversation with the rating agencies, they acknowledge the improvements that have been made. They're happy to see that the county now has reserves in place. They're happy to know that we're not bonding for tax certs. Moody's actually did a special report, calling the fact that we're not bonding a credit positive. Standard & Poor's took us from a negative outlook to a stable outlook.
okay, thank you.
Legislator McKenzie.
And just to back up on one of the points being made by Legislator Nicolello, when you said those items in the fund balance were non-spendable, or I think dedicated is probably a better description, that's not a requirement. That's by agreement between you and NYFA and by policy?
No, it has nothing, it's outside of NYFA. I mean, this is just good government. These are things that we did with this legislature's approval to set these funds aside.
But I'm saying by a policy decision that was made.
Correct.
So there's no requirement that they were made to be dedicated to those items.
Correct. We could have left those, we could have made, if we had not done that, the undesignated fund balance would have been $260 million.
Okay, and then on one of the items that came up earlier was the reduction in the long-term bond balance. And if you could just address, there were a number of items in my understanding that contributed to that, including no longer borrowing for tax certiorari and other items. If you could just address what the factors were, in your opinion, that resulted in that.
Sure. The administration has taken a strong look at the capital program, taking a look at what our infrastructure needs are, looking at the cash that we had on hand in other projects, and the projects that we've already borrowed for, there's been a lot of focus on using those funds to do what those projects were intended to do. We also, as we have stated, the plan was to borrow $60 million for tax certs this year. We're not doing that, so obviously that helps. And so just with the better management of our resources, it has helped to reduce that outstanding debt.
Then if you could address the issue of not borrowing for capital expenditures, which in terms of whether that's a blanket failure to borrow and what the long-term effects of that might be.
Well, I think it's two separate issues. we have come to this body to get bonding authority for various projects and have been unsuccessful. However, because we do have no other bond authorization out there, we are able to keep working on the county's infrastructure and get some projects done. Long-term, obviously, those projects are going to have to get done eventually, and if they don't get done sooner than later, it could cost us more money.
Okay, and just if one or two more items, if you could just address the issue of NYFA statutory, an item that came up earlier, which to our understanding is just a label that was chosen by NYFA. If you could just explain that quickly.
Sure. The NYFA statute says that they look at the results on a GAAP basis, and NYFA interpreted the statute to include other financing sources, which are allowed by GAAP, but they decided not to allow those to be included.
I'm sorry, one of the items you have is an unfavorable variance is public safety fee shortfall. Could you please explain what that is?
In terms of last year's budget adoption for 2017, there was a delay in terms of approving certain fees, and the public safety fee was one of those fees. And in that delay, that basically, we couldn't impose the fee until January 1st, and once you impose the fee at that time, then it basically, there's a lag before you collect it, which is 3 months, because first you have to issue the notice of violation, and then go through the approval process, mailing process and all that, and then once the check gets mailed to the county, at that point, that's when you really are achieving your revenue. So that delay actually pushed out us receiving public safety fee revenue for about 3.5 months.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions, and it's part of their structural balance plan. The county has been able to reduce labor costs because of the reduction in the workforce since 2009, I believe. This year, every year we expect others to leave the workforce, and in particular, the police workforce. What's the projection as far as the police who will be leaving?
Well, currently, the police workforce in terms of sworn officers is 2,476 currently. We anticipate that 175 will retire. That's what's included in our projection at the Office of Management and Budget. So there are varying projections currently, but that's what we're projecting.
And just to clarify, that's not 175 off the 2476, that includes those people who've already left.
That includes those people who've already left.
Okay, now what's the impact of that high number of separations on the budget?
Currently, the Budget Office is projecting a little over $51 million of termination cost payout for 2017 at the 175 officers.
And how will that be paid for?
Well, currently, the $8.5 million surplus that I alluded to before includes the payment of the $51 million in termination costs without the use of the EBF reserve fund, which is the Employee Accrued Liability Reserve Fund. So at this time, we're able to still support that level of exodus separation.
Okay, right now it's too soon to tell the effect of VSIC will be on the number of people who will be leaving the county workforce. Do we have any projection as to how many will be leaving or could be leaving, and what the cost would be to the county, and how would it be paid for?
Okay, I'm going to address that question. Both of us will address it 2 different ways. As of yesterday, I think we're about close to about 220 people have already submitted. They have until September 15th, so let's say it goes up to 300, that's possible. We are committed to pay for it out of our operating dollars. We're not going to be seeking bonding, that is not necessary. As with the surplus that Roseanne has talked about, the $8.5 million, and the salary savings that we will get from having those people off the payroll September 15th, we should be able to absorb the extra cost due to the incentive and the liability that is owed to these people.
Currently for the people who have elected to separate, approximately a little over, about a third are electing a 3 payout, so that'll be paid out over the course of 3 years. So the brunt of that will actually aid us in the 2017 payout. And then in addition to that, this projection for 17 of the $8.5 million surplus does not include, we've taken preliminary steps back in June to revoke OTPS spending for multiple departments. So in order to try to help mitigate what's coming.
Minority Leader?
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Just some clarity I wanted to provide first. I don't think anyone in this institution on our side, I don't think any, you know what? I think this was a Republican mic.
Never used it.
That's why it's not working.
Just kidding, for the record.
It's on the record now.
Of course, I just want to make sure, it's clarity, just kidding. That said, I would just want to provide, I know the analogy of infrastructure in regards to infrastructure not being done now can be more costly in the future. We actually think that's the case. We do believe it will be more costly. However, we think it is even more devastating and even more costly to not have the proper oversight and transparency in a process that can have waste and fraud that's in it. So that being said, that's why we cannot believe, and it's not a question for you guys, this is more of a statement.
I was not going to answer it.
That's why we cannot believe anyone would object to have an independent oversight as well as independent transparency, transparency in this process. That being said, just to go into your report again, Eric, the 2009 budget number in your workforce management slide, that's a budgeted number, correct?
That is correct.
So if I wanted to compare apples to apples, because you had mentioned that we have seen a reduction of 1,700 employees or headcount, what was the actual in 2009? Because I don't remember an actual being that high.
It was in the 8,800 range.
So roughly, so we still saw a reduction, which I'm not doubting that, but it was more like 1,400 actual reduction in people that left the county.
Right.
Okay. That being said, let's fast forward to your 2017 outlook page. You mentioned that obviously looking at the favorable variances versus the unfavorable variances, the county has looking for a total budgetary surplus of $8.5 million. We've also, which is not incorporated into this slide from what I can see, is, I think it was alluded to earlier in regards to the visa. A couple questions about the visa. One, do you have a breakdown by department and further broken down by unit of where the potential 221
people are in
221 people that are leaving?
major funds, yeah.
Do you have that breakdown with you today?
No, I do not.
When can you provide this legislature with that breakdown?
We can do it before you meet.
You can do it before we meet on the visa? Okay. Today?
Yes.
Okay. Because,
And just because I know we have people listening, can someone please work on that as we're speaking?
Thank you.
the
Jose Luis,
second-
that's probably you.
So Roseanne, if I'm understanding you correctly, the $8.5 million is going to pay for the termination pay. Well, I'm sorry. Let me clarify. The $8.5 million coupled with the salary savings from people that leave on September 15th is going to pay for the termination pay as well as the $1,000 a year for the 221 people that are going to be leaving.
Correct.
Correct. I mean, basically at this time, that's our estimation. And in addition to.
Do you have a spreadsheet that breaks that down? Like breaks down the cost in terms of that? Like how much we're spending on VSIP, 221 people, the countless years of service, I don't know, people, is anyone over 10 years?
Well,
They're
Do
all
you have
over
that
10
broken
years.
down somewhere we can see
they're
that?
all over 10 years. The average is 27 years.
So on average, people are gonna be getting, each of those 221 employees are gonna be getting $27,000
On average.
On average.
on average. So taking that number, 27,000, and times it by 221, I don't have a calculator in front of me, coupled with the termination pay, what's the average termination pay among those 221 people?
I would say it's around, I think in total it would be around $57,000 on average.
Did you
But-
do the math
but-
on the 221 times
But
27,000?
right now, those numbers are preliminary. Those are, basically using numbers from 2015. Currently, we have not worked out, HR has not worked out the liability for the leave. We're currently doing that, so we can basically get you closer numbers shortly.
So I just did the quick math. I have about 5.967 what the visa would cost us on average, based on the average numbers that you gave us. What's the termination pay for these 221? It could be higher, obviously. You said it could go up to 300. So this is a low number. Let me see.
I would say,
it could go up to 14 million,
yeah, I would say it's about $56,000 a person.
56,000 per person. Return pay.
All in, with the liability visa.
So that I got 12.3.
With the yes. That's
So
around
I
there.
have a total cost of potentially anywhere upwards of $18 million.
No, we think it's around the $13 million range. So I think $57,000 in terms of that average liability would include the visa payment.
Oh, so wait a minute, so okay, so
Yes.
it includes the visa?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the total exposure is, so you've calculated termination pay for those 221 people? And so that number,
We haven't calculated it, but I'm giving you an average of what I think it may be.
but all in is 12.3 million, assuming 221. What if it grows to 300?
And if it grows to 300, then
How
we'll
would you
address
pay for
that.
it?
We
I'm
can-
saying, does the savings still work in terms of paying for the visa, paying for the termination pay, but having now, instead of 221, 300 less people where you have that salary savings,
Correct.
it still pays for each other, still pays?
Right, but then
We
you
would
also
have-
have to, I'm sorry, you also have to realize that a third of them would take a 3-pay. So there's a differential there. So it's not all 221 people are taking a cost payout on year one, which would be 2017. So the payment would go over 4 years, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. So, there's a lot of math that goes into this.
Just explain for the record, I understand why you said that a third would not take the lump, or it makes
A lump sum.
Right.
What we're
Just explain
seeing
for the
out
record
of,
why
what
you
we're
said
seeing
that.
out of the.
I know the history, but just explain the.
So what we're seeing out of who's filed so far, approximately a third will take a 3 payout.
On the form, they have to elect how they want to get paid out for termination pay.
Yeah.
And just go back, so you believe the county would have enough savings to pay for the VSIP as the termination pay, whether it's lump or it's over 3 years, you believe the county should have enough to pay for it?
Yes, and as I stated earlier, if it gets up to 300, we will probably have to take other actions strategically to find other cost-saving measures to cover that level of departure.
Okay. So the estimated savings for the out years has been projected to be what again exactly?
We are not putting out a number for the out years because we will be submitting a budget September 15th, which will include that estimate.
Is there a 50%?
Yes.
You heard Michelle's question, okay. So,
On the record, the plan is to backfill at a 50% rate. So that's the savings that we will reflect in the budget.
and is there agreement from the unions?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. The next area I wanted to jump into real quick is the tax cert liability. And you mentioned it a little bit in your statement in regards to the county being able to shift and be able to finish 1 year sooner than seeking bonding again. However, when we looked at the NIFs as per August 22nd, which was yesterday, only $15.6 million has been paid to date, which in the past it seemed to be there's been, I guess, discussion that the payments have been made slower for some reason. Can you clarify why we've only paid $15.6 million to date?
Sure. Essentially, our decision not to bond was done after we made our cash flow projections. So to order to protect the county's cash position, we recently started paying out. We started paying out in May, roughly about $5 million a month. We've explained to the tax cert board that that's the expectation that they can continue to expect. And then in December, when we do our TAN, our tax anticipation note, we will have more of an influx of cash, and at that point, we can do one big massive payment at year end.
Okay. And that payment will be made up because, if I'm understanding this correctly, there's still only $15 million that's budgeted to go towards tax assurance, but the rest comes from the accruals.
The budget itself says is $75 million.
What is that made up of? Is that coming from different areas, or that's in one budget line?
That's in one budget line,
The appropriation.
it's $75 million.
But how is it being paid, though?
It'll get paid from the operating budget, and at some point, we will come to this legislative body for a appropriation to use fund balance to help pay for that.
Right.
Just to go back 1 second to your 2017 outlook line, the contractual services associated with the inmate healthcare costs, the bus route restoration, and the red light camera program, I would envision a big chunk of that is predominantly the inmate healthcare costs.
Yes.
The red light camera program, how much does that attribute to this $14.3 million?
Approximately $1 million.
And that's even with the $150 fee that people are being charged?
No, the 35% goes to the vendor in terms of fines that are collected.
35% of the new $50 portion?
No.
No. The 35% in terms of what the vendor receives as payment does not include administrative costs or administrative fees. So it's just predicated solely on the fine amount, which is the $50. That has not changed.
Okay.
We've actually, when we did the amendment for the contract, that amount actually went down in terms of the revenue share with the vendor. I believe at one time it was 38% and went down to 35%.
Just say goodbye now.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Hi, Eric and Rosanna. Good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon, Legislator Bynum.
Good afternoon.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the OTPS spending. I know you mentioned earlier that you have taken precautions and actually have spoken to certain departments and are not allowing for them to utilize their OTPS spending budget. Is that correct?
We've revoked approximately. Yes, we've revoked some funding.
How much did you revoke?
Currently, it's approximately $6.8 million, I believe.
Okay. Could we have a report as to which departments were revoked and what were the planned expenditures that will now be on hold or be deferred?
Sure.
Okay. And can I have an idea as to, on that particular budget line, what we've spent to date and in terms of expenditures on OTPS? And
Our current July report will actually have a column that says current year to date, and Michelle can, but will be.
I actually like an itemized list as to exactly how the money was spent.
Okay, just to clarify, can you define what you mean by itemized?
Itemized, because that's thousands of rows of data. So,
Okay.
I mean, usually we roll up or sum up, probably for each department, what the OTPS would be for each department. We can, sum it up for you in terms of what the current obligation is.
Okay, so I would like to know, yes, what the obligation is. I would like to see it broken down by contract expenditures to equipment.
Well, contracts are usually fully encumbered, so we would only restrict balances that weren't encumbered.
Okay, So that would be fine. As to what was spent, I'm asking to what was spent to this point in the year and what's encumbered.
So
So
essentially-
whatever contracts are encumbered, I would just expect it to be spent.
All right, so just to be clear, you're asking essentially for a report that outlines by vendor how much we've spent.
Just on DE.
Yep. And also what departments, yeah, by D, there you go. And then also I'd like to know the spending plan for the remaining departments that weren't, where there was no revocation of their utilization of the money.
Sure.
I'd like to know what the plan is for spending. Are we confident that 6.8, pulling back 6.8 is a comfortable number? Based on the fact that we're looking at 14.3 million in a potential deficit in that budget line?
Well,
Right.
remember, it's the overall budget that we focus on. And as I stated earlier, if the number of people who decide to leave grows, we may have to revoke more funds.
Right. So in terms of the DE that's projected here, the $14.3 million shortfall, those are the contracts that did not go according to plan.
Right, that's the
So,
jail and.
so that's why the deficit, everywhere else, we're either achieving or exceeding our goals in terms of budget.
Okay, and so I have to keep coming back to this point, and I hate to do it, but in the earlier part of this year, when we were looking for funding to save the buses, and there was a request to revoke some of the spending on the OTPS so that we could have utilized that money, we were told that it was absolutely impossible, that every, dollar in the OTPS, line was earmarked, and that every piece of equipment was essential, and there was absolutely no way to do any kind of revocation of the spending. So I find it interesting now that within the last month, that we did a budget transfer from OTPS to offset some of the salary expenditures at the jail. And then we also now are, moving some other,
So to that,
departments into a revoked status. I think if we add all the money together between what happened last month and what you just told me in terms of 6.8 being revoked, we're somewhere near almost $10 million. And what we had asked for at one point was a simple, $3 million to save the buses. So I just find it interesting that we can find money and revoke spending when the administration sees fit.
Well, I think clearly, as you all know, when you look at a budget early in the year, you don't know how things are going, so you do a risk assessment, and at that point, you look at it and you say, I'm not sure how sales tax is going to be. I'm not sure what the outlook is going to be from income and expense or other items. We don't know how many police are going to retire. So when you look at it at that point, you do a snapshot, you say to yourself, no, I don't have any flexibility, I don't have any other money available. But then as the year progresses, you see how other spending is going, you see how you have saved in different areas, and you do prioritize.
So we can revoke now at this stage of the game, but we didn't think that it was important to keep the buses on the road and to make sure that our riders were actually able to utilize a service, to which now we're seeing that that's also been impacted, right? Because the fare box is down. Why is the fare box down? Because people don't have the ability to catch a bus when there is no bus doesn't exist, right? So
and to
I think it was,
And to that point, Legislator Bino, actually, we are seeing that fare box is down, and our projections don't include that fare box is actually a little lower. So that revocation could also compensate for the county's portion to actually come in and absorb or mitigate that lower fare box amount as well.
I'm not arguing against the revocation. I'm saying that we could have utilized this
Right.
same practice much earlier in the year to ensure that the bus service was not interrupted.
I
But-
agree with you if I had a crystal ball
Because now-
in February, but I actually didn't.
Because the way I see it now is that this OTPS spending line is an operational rainy day fund. Because whenever you need to now shift money and find money, this is where we go to revoke spending. And this is the same thing that we asked for much earlier on in this year to save the buses. So I'm looking at this OTPS line as simply a rainy day fund, an operational rainy day fund. And I think that we should look at, how we allocate money into that line moving forward. And I'm gonna be looking at it very closely in this budget season, because now I'm onto it. I'm hip to the game. So,
So I just make a comment,
I
please?
wouldn't say it's a game.
yeah.
I wouldn't categorize it as a rainy day fund. It's a shift of priorities. There are things that we have told departments, you're just gonna have to do without that this year because we've now made a policy decision to do something
And
else.
that's right, and that was the ask from earlier on, from this body earlier on, to look at the OTPS line and determine what equipment and services were just not essential at the time to save a service that we know is essential for not only for this, the ability for our riders to be able to get to and from work, but this has safety implications, this has economic implications. This is, a far-reaching, impact to a county, and not only those that live here, but those that visit here, and those that pay taxes to be able to enjoy that type of service. So, again, I'm aware of what's happening in that line, and I'm gonna be watching it very closely. As a matter of fact, last year, I asked for a spending plan for that budget line, and I was told that I was not getting that. Well, I have to tell you that this year, I'm gonna actually demand it. We have to have a spending plan for that line. We need to be able to understand how you're utilizing the OTPS budget line. It's
And
just
the
not,
legislator-
it shouldn't be something that's so clandestine that we cannot receive any detail as to how it's intended to be spent.
Legislator
Bynum.
Bynum, I'm sorry, we've been publishing a spending plan for 2 years.
Not
So,
in the OTPS line,
Yes, we have.
and not in great detail to the extent to which I asked for it.
by department.
I asked for it.
Okay.
You're
I'm
telling
sorry.
me by department, but I wanna know what is it that each department is actually gonna be utilizing? How are they utilizing? And that was my request, and I was told that I could not receive that. I think that we need to receive that in this year, because if we could easily go back and revoke spending, we could just as easily just not earmark it or be able to prioritize spending and defer some of that so that we can maintain buses and things that are important to our constituents. But I'm ready to move on, because I don't.
But Legislator Bynum, I just want to say, if you ask our departments, they would not categorize it as being easy. It is very difficult to manage with the revoked spending. You talk to our public works departments, talk to the police department. It does, and our IT department, they will tell you that it does burden them, it does create a major challenge for them, and it could potentially impact their operations. But if this body decides that it's more important to fund VEEP, it's more important to fund the youth board, and it's more important to fund bus services, then those are decisions that are made. But on the flip side, this body can also choose to raise revenue.
But Eric, let me be clear. Again, I believe that we are not allowed to be partners in those decisions because we are not given the level of detail as to how this money is going to be spent. When asked, we're told that every single dollar is essential, and every single plan or allocation the sky would fall out from the sun would fall out of the sky if that money is touched. But now I'm seeing that we go back and we take $10 million of that same funding and we're moving it now, to take care of some other expenditures that I believe, we could have planned differently for.
Right.
We could have planned very differently for what happened with Armor. We could have planned very differently and that could have played out very differently. I believe we set ourselves up for failure in our negotiations with the medical center in resuming services because we did not get out ahead of the issues with Armor, and we did not begin the procurement process to have somebody else in place. So I could sit here and this whole thing could mushroom into a whole bunch of different other topics, but I don't want to do that. My point is that money was requested earlier on to see if we could reduce spending there so we could have saved the buses, and we didn't do that.
Well-
We failed to do that.
I just need to make one other comment.
No, I'm moving on, Eric. Let's not make any more comments.
Well, no, but if you take a look, some of
No,
our
I
savings.
don't, let's move on, Eric. Let's go to the,
Legislative final, I think you should respond.
no, I think, because the conversation is getting out of control. I'm fine with it,
Okay. If you take a look back at the first quarter, first we have to go through a snow season. We had a very mild snow season. We got savings here, so we were able to take those funds back. We took a look at our utility bills. We found out that, okay, we could support a lower budget for utilities. These are the things that happen throughout the year, and that's how we can make those decisions later.
You did not tell me that this was a result of utility costs or that we actualized a savings because we had a mild winter. What I was told
Part
was
of the
that, what I
revocation.
was told that money was revoked from departments for spending. That is what I was told. We're not talking about a mild winter. We're not talking about the fact that utility costs were down. We are specifically, I was told that departments' spending was revoked. And my point is if we could revoke spending now, we could have done it earlier on to save buses, which is an essential service for our community. Not only is it a matter of allowing for people to get to and from work and to medical appointments, it's also a benefit for safety. Further, it's a benefit for economic development. I think we failed. That is the point that I'm making. But I'm comfortable with moving on unless you want to have him continue to
I just want to
put his
clarify.
foot in his mouth.
Roseanne, go ahead.
So the OTPS revocation includes a large amount for utilities as well. So as the year progressed, once we saw that our utility expenses were lower, we revoked much of the funds in that cost center. So part of OTPS is utilities.
But
So
that
I
was
just,
not what was told. I was told revoke spending. So if
we
we're
revoked
talking about,
appropriation.
if we're
Is
talking, talking about utilities.
Legislative
No,
final.
but if we're talking about utilities and we're talking about revoking spending, to me that is two different things. But instead of going on and on about it on the floor, to which I don't think that I'm gonna ever be satisfied with the answers, let's move on. In the interest of time, let's move on.
You're not gonna get to first base, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I thank you for your testimony today. And I know that it's not an easy task to deal with.
But I'm not finished.
I thought you said.
I said I was not finished. I said just move on from that
Well, move
question.
on, lady.
Thank you, presiding officer. I always address you very respectfully. I would
Come on,
expect the
let's
same
go.
from you. I would expect the same.
Let's go, legislative final.
You said you wanted to.
Move on.
In terms of the fund balance, the $170.5 million that is not earmarked, that is not dedicated funding, what is not unspendable, whatever term we want to use today. Can you explain to me what the administration's plan is for, if at all, for spending any of that money?
As has been stated previously, we will be spending some of the fund balance to pay for tax rates this year.
And is that at the tune of $33 million?
36.
$36 million? Is there any funding expected to be expended beyond that?
If we do not have enough funding after we do further revoking and other surpluses to cover BSIP, it could have an impact on the fund balance.
And based on some of the risk that was identified in other financial reports, have you at all come to any estimation of what that could be?
In what sense, I'm sorry?
In terms of the risk in the budget of not making your projected excess
I would
of
say that-
revenue at 8.5 and instead it comes in, you know, that you have a deficit. Have you in any way forecasted where this could go?
NYFA does their projection, Budget Review does theirs, the controller does theirs. the Office of Management and Budget takes a look at what they consider to be risk, and they have conservatively estimated that we will have a surplus of $8.5 million excluding VSIP.
Okay, so.
I believe OLBR is at a $9.5 million
That's
deficit.
correct. That's
So,
correct.
you know, we're all different, but in terms of how we've, our track record in terms of budgeting and projections, you know, we come pretty close, you know, towards the end of the year in terms of projecting.
And I think the other bodies, they tend to be extremely conservative. They don't know what management has planned to do corrective action, so they do projections saying that if nothing else changes, here's what the results will be. Obviously, we're not gonna manage that way.
Okay, and so, there are no other plans, I just have to ask the question again, for this $170.5 million?
I think you will see whatever results happen. If something, let's say, there's a downturn in the economy, that can make it go down. But in terms of something that we know of, no.
Okay, and so, the actual fund balance, right? What is your understanding that the minimum requirements are for that?
Well, we set the policy. Our policy is 4 to 5% on a budgetary basis. Not a GAAP basis, but a budgetary basis.
On a budgetary basis?
Correct.
Yes.
So no more than 5% is what you're,
Yes. Now, I will be upfront to say rating agencies disagree with us. They think it should be a
Higher.
lot higher. But knowing this body, knowing the taxpayers of Nassau County, I don't think they could afford for us to have a larger fund balance like the
So-
rating agencies would like.
well, we're exceeding 5%
Yes,
at this point. So we're sitting with taxpayer dollars.
which is why we're going to be using some of that fund balance to pay for
Your
taxes.
certs, right.
Okay. Do you have a plan as to how you expect to spend down the fund balance to get it to what you consider to be your policy at 5%?
Tax certs.
Okay. What, do you have a plan? Is it a
We're
multi-year,
using-
a multi-year plan?
No, as we stated, we're going to use approximately $36 million of the budgetary fund balance, which means that at a best case scenario, we will be roughly at about $160 million at the end of 17. Best case scenario. It could be better, it could be worse, but roughly, let's say 160.
Do you think it would be beneficial to the administration, to taxpayers, and to this body to develop a plan to be able to spend down this fund balance in a responsible manner so that we're not rating the fund balance in any given year?
Well, when our policy also states that we will no longer be paying bonding to pay for judgments, that can have a major impact on this county's operations. There are cases out there that could cost us over $40 million. If I have to pay $40 million out of operating funds, your fund balance will go down.
Yep.
Okay, and so have we had any opportunity to identify those cases?
Yes, we have.
Okay, and the potential risk associated with them?
Yes, we have.
Okay, do you have the ability to share that information with this body?
I am pretty positive that some of those cases have been discussed with this body and decisions were made not to allow for bonding. And therefore, we need this money in fund balance to cover those cases if we are forced to make a payment.
Okay, again, is there an ability to provide this body with a report of the for the exposure based on those cases that remain open?
I will defer to the county attorney. I don't know what conversations they've had with your counsel, but your counsel should follow up with the county attorney's office.
Okay, because I think it's important that this body have that information, because if we're going to be making decisions, you know, and determinations as what is an appropriate fund balance level and how it should appropriately be used, I think we're going to have that information.
I totally agree with you.
Okay, so again, I'm asking for those reports. I think hopefully we have a list of what I've asked for. If not, I've written it down. I have a list, and if you need to reach out to me, please do. And anything that you compile, I would ask that you compile it and give it to this full body, not
We will
just to
do
this
that.
Budget Review Committee. Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you, Legislator Bynum, and thank you, Eric, thank you, Roseanne. And this concludes the Budget Review Committee hearing, and we're going to take a short break before we go into the two committees that are scheduled for today, Finance and Rules.
Eric, copy that report, or can you just give me yours?
I would like to.
Because you can't refuse somebody or revoke somebody from using utilities.